Welcome to Advisor Talk with Frank LaRosa. Brought to you by Elite Consulting Partners, it's the only podcast offering unfiltered guidance and direct advice for all things concerning financial advisors, RIAs, and the practitioners in the wealth management business. Learn more and subscribe today at eliteconsultingpartners.com/podcast. And now, here's your host, Frank LaRosa.
Hey everybody, welcome to Advisor Talk with Frank LaRosa. I am your host, Frank LaRosa, of course, and today I'm joined by someone new to our team at Elite Consulting Partners, Director of RIA Services, Vince Leto. Vince, welcome to the team.
Glad to be here.
Welcome to the family, the team, whatever you want to call it. Dysfunctional family at times, but we're here and we're finally getting this done. A little snafu yesterday. We had to push this thing back a little bit. But today we're going to talk about, for our listeners that are joining us, welcome to the show. We appreciate it. For those that are new, we hope you find it informative. Generally, these are based on conversations that we're having with our clients, whether it's the same week, the week before, but they're all of these conversations are all about Advisor Talk, which is why it's called Advisor Talk with Frank LaRosa. So today we're going to get really granular, and I'll say granular, but
details, right?
Detailed and really basic about the RIA world. You know, we talk to a lot of advisors at my organization, and some of them will say, well, I think I'm going to go RIA, or I'm going to be an RIA, and they don't really necessarily know what it means. So I've wanted Vince to come on. He's got a long background in the space, so maybe give us some background. And then I'm just gonna fire some questions at him that may seem, for some of you, somewhat elementary, but I think that there's a huge swath of people within the financial service industry that don't understand some of the basic things about this space, the RIA space, right? So, Vince, first, why don't we just get into a little bit of your background and why you're an expert in this space?
Happy to be here, Frank. It's a great organization. A little bit about my background. You know, coming out of school, first job out of college, I was a retail rep for Morgan Stanley, right? And I did that for about 3 years or so. I think I learned a good amount what an advisor goes through to build a book, keep clients happy, and really run a business. Not an easy job at all, right? I mean, some people look at advisors, think it's like an easy position. Really, it's not. So, I think I understand what advisors go through to really build their book and maintain it. So that's important. From there, I moved on to the mutual fund wholesaling world. I worked for Alliance Capital, Alliance Bernstein, moved on to New York Life, wholesaling variable annuities. So always working with advisors throughout my whole entire career. And I think, again, that's an important aspect of we really understand the business, what they're trying to achieve. From New York Life, I moved on to TD Ameritrade, where I spent nearly 15 years recruiting and working with advisors that were looking to create their own RIA. And we had a successful time at TD. I initially worked with state-registered RIA firms, and that's firms below 100 million. We'll get into that a little bit. And then I covered New Jersey and Delaware with firms above $100 million, and had success in both territories. And again, just working with advisors. Moved on to Axos, which is another custodian in the space, for a short while. And I spent nearly 2 years at Raymond James Custody. So I think the background of being an advisor, working with advisors on mutual funds, annuities, even to a certain extent 401ks when we were at Alliance Bernstein, really understand what the advisor needs to do to build a portfolio for their client. Again, keep them happy, manage their expectations. That was a big word in the advisor community, or at least in the Morgan Stanley world, right? You manage your expectations. And I think if I look back, right, and we'll kind of get into the RIA world a little bit, I remember clearly, I'm 48, so my first years as being an advisor, residualizing your income was like a big deal. Yeah. That was a big word in the advisor community, and they mainly did it via SMAs, right? And they would get a 1% trail, residualize, they're buying individual equities versus mutual funds, they're not getting hit with tax cap gains or et cetera from a fund selling positions that the client didn't necessarily want to sell. So that was kind of like the big push in the wirehouse world to really become more fee-based, right? And kind of look at it from a business years and years ago, 30 plus years ago, advisors could have, or brokers, right? Not advisors, brokers. Brokers could have a big month, big commission month. Maybe they did a lot of 1035s, a lot of annuities, or maybe they sold a lot of A or B shares. B-share
mutual funds.
Right? And they could have a big month. And then the next month, they'd be at the bottom of that list, right? And every branch has a list. We used to keep ours in the mailroom, but it would be posted up for everybody to see, what your production was for that month. And I think the businesses, as far as the actual wirehouses, probably really appreciate having more of a streamline or a stable revenue number. And obviously the advisors appreciate that as well.
Also the analysts too, right? Because they put a higher multiple on recurring revenue. So that was a driving factor.
So that kind of comes into play, right? And I think obviously the advisor then, again, working on a fee-based, trying to grow the level of the assets. I grow your account, I'm getting a bigger fee. We're in the same line, right? So that all kind of played into the world. And you kind of fast forward, and more advisors were looking for more independence. And that typically meant, years ago, you were going to an IBD, which is more independent than a wirehouse type of world, right? Less support, maybe, more independence, more of your revenue in your pocket, right? So, but advisors then were kind of realizing that maybe that's not as independent as I really thought it would be, right? And the RIA became more and more popular. And I think where I really learned about the RIA was at Alliance Capital. We had a division that really catered towards independence and this RIA channel, and nobody knew what it was about. It was kind of like, why are you even talking to those guys? Who are They don't
even have a Series 7.
Yeah, who are those guys? I mean, why? How do clients even trust them? They work out of their house or like a small office. And it was an unknown, obviously. But it was the side where it was growing, right? And that was kind of like really appealing. That was something that I kind of noticed, that this segment is growing much, much faster than all the other segments. And, what am I missing here? Why don't I don't understand this? So I need to learn a little bit more about this through the opportunity of joining a TD. And again, TD in the custody space was not a big player, right? There's some other big players that were ahead of them at the time.
Typically Pershing, Schwab, Fidelity, right?
I mean, all those firms were bigger players generally. And I guess TD had a lot to prove. And they basically did a pretty good job in building out their technology offering and making themselves more attractive to advisors that were looking to create their own RIA shop.
Well, I think where TD really had formed a niche is, and this is, we're not here to talk about custodians, but I think where TD really formed a niche was because they were smaller, they could provide the custodial services, but more of a hands-on sort of higher, I don't say higher end, but boutique service level that maybe a Schwab or Pershing or Fidelity wasn't giving, right? And I think, candidly now, I think LPL and or Raymond James, maybe more so LPL, is going to now fill that space with their custodial services. So let me just get into, I want to just, for the audience, you made a couple of comments. So I want to just get into a couple of Q&A things, right?
Sure.
Just be like sort of Q&A, one of those fast Q&A sessions. So at the beginning, you said you started working with state registered RIAs, and then you moved into over $100 million. What's the difference between a state registered RIA and an SEC registered RIA? Aren't they all under the SEC?
So it's kind of...
By the way, that's a leading question, by the way. I know the answer.
It's a good question, right? Obviously, Frank knows the answer, right? But I think to demystify it, right? I mean, from a simple point of view, state registered RIAs, anyone below $100 million. So when you're going to file to become an RIA, if you know that you're going to be below $100 million, let's say within the first 6 to 12 months, you're filing as a state registered advisor. And if you know you're going to be above $100 million within a defined period of time, a shorter period of time, you're going to file as an SEC registered advisor. It really comes down to, I guess one way I like to describe it is who's policing you, right? And state registered advisors are being regulated by the state regulators, and SEC advisors are being regulated by the SEC. It's the same rules. It's the same guidelines. It's not as if state registered advisors could get away with something that SEC advisors can't. It's basically the same rules and regulations. Who is policing you and who is
so why does
ultimately going to audit you? If it
and
comes
this is
down
a
to
question because I'm working with a guy right now, and for the life of me, I don't understand this. But he's literally not taking on new accounts because he doesn't want to go over $100 million. So he's suppressing the growth of his business because he wants to stay below 100 million. He's right around 90 million or so, give or take what the market's doing, right? What's the difference? Like, why would an advisor not want to become an SEC registered RIA versus state registered?
I'm not really aware that there's a good reason to do that. I think some advisors have a misconception that the SEC is going to get me, or the SEC has more audit power than the state regulators do. That might be true to a certain extent. But years ago, I think, the average RIA firm that was SEC registered might have had an audit every 4 years, maybe even sometimes longer than that. I think the SEC is trying to do a better job in kind of auditing RIAs on a more regular basis. So that might be one concern. But realistically, I think if you're, just like when you're a broker, you're keeping your daytimer notes, you're keeping your activity in your CRM system, you're databasing your emails, and you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to hide, right? Like there's not really a real good reason to not take on a $5 million account because the SEC might come knocking on the door. And quite frankly, just like anything else, if they come knocking on the door and you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to hide. So.
Right. Okay, cool. This next question is because I think a lot of mainly wirehouse advisors for the most part, just because they're in their bubble, right? Not necessarily advisors that are independent, and they say, I'm going to go RIA. I'm going to become an RIA.
Yeah. Right.
Why is that statement wrong? And the real question is, what's the difference between an RIA and an IAR?
So, an RIA, obviously, there's a lot of responsibilities. Let's take a 3-person team that's at Merrill Lynch, right? Typically, one of the people on the team is going to be the leader, right? The bigger book or kind of the man in charge, et cetera. So who from that team of 3 is going to be the chief compliance officer on their RIA, right? Because you could set up an RIA, you could have outside legal counsel guiding you for compliance services. But typically, unless you're paying a much larger fee for the outsourced compliance service, one of the 3 advisors is going to be named chief compliance officer. And I think sometimes that scares people, right? It scares them, what are my real responsibilities? That's not what I do. And I think it scares them because in the wirehouse world, they're used to someone in the office who's the compliance manager, right? Sitting in that branch, day in, day out, it's a different world. I remember we used to have a cashiering department. You'd hand in checks. They would give you slips, right? And it was sort of a big deal. So for someone that's in the wirehouse world to kind of set up their own RIA and I'm taking on all these responsibilities that the branch is doing for me, they don't really envision that they could do it, I think. And I think, quite frankly, the wirehouse world does a really good job at telling advisors they can't do it, right? Or kind of scaring them that there's a lot of unknowns. You're going to get in trouble. You're going to get fined. You're going to be kicked out of the business, whatever it may be, right? So a lot of that that's all scare tactics for the most part. But
it is important to understand, though, that if you're going to form an RIA and getting back to sort of, I don't want to say dumbing it down, but I think there's a big misnomer that you're actually, as an individual producer, you're not an RIA, right? An RIA is a corporate entity. You're an IAR, which is an investment advisor representative, underneath your RIA.
Yeah. I mean, an RIA is basically you're starting a business.
It's like an LLC.
You're filing an LLC. Maybe you might file taxes as an S corp. Right. We'll talk to your CPA. There's a lot of benefits, to doing that. So at the end of the day, you're starting a business, and some advisors are lifestyle advisors where I like to manage my book. I like to, manage my client expectations. I make a pretty good living at that. And I don't necessarily want to manage a business. At the end of the day, whether it's at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, I'm done. And there's a certain aspect where you're running the RIA. I mean, you're going out and you're finding office space to lease. You're hiring assistants. When who's going to do the payroll? Who's going to take care of payroll taxes?
Benefits, taxes, right?
Everything along those lines. That becomes, kind of a task that not every advisor is willing to take, right? And for those that aren't willing to take it, there's another option, right? You don't need to start your own RIA to be affiliated with an RIA. You could tuck in with a larger entity and be an IAR and get the majority of the benefits of practically owning your own RIA without actually doing a lot of the, I guess what some would call minutiae work of running a business.
Because you can tuck into another RIA, still maintain, not all of them are like this, but the majority are, still maintain your own corporate entity, your own LLC or DBA, right? Underneath somebody else's RIA. And then you're getting, if you do the math, many times the margins are just as good because the RIA itself is paying for a compliance officer or outsourced compliance plus legal counsel, all of those things. Because Schwab, I think there's also a misnomer that Schwab, Fidelity, whatever the custodian you choose is going to do your compliance for you, and they don't. It's not they're going, we don't do that. You have to do that yourself. So, I think the other misnomer is, I'm going to go RIA because I get 100% payout. Right. So, so explain how that's not really true.
You do and you don't. And I guess certain custodians work differently. Some custodians have no ticket charge, no asset-based pricing, and maybe have less services that they provide you, right? And you would get 100% pass-through of your revenue. So if you charge 1% and that equaled $1 million, just for argument's sake, you would get $1 million. But then out of that $1 million, you're basically paying everything that's associated with running that business. Your compliance, your errors and omissions insurance, you're buying billing and reporting systems. You want MoneyGuide Pro or eMoney, go out and buy that yourself.
Wait a minute, you said buying, billing, and reporting. Doesn't Schwab do my billing for me like Morgan Stanley does for the advisor?
So that's where some of these custodians that don't really charge an asset-based pricing structure, they're not going to provide a billing and reporting system.
So the advisor, this is sort of a leading question here. So the advisor actually has to have a system in place that they have to pay for to actually collect the fees from their clients.
100%. Yep. Unless they're looking to do it, where they're going to data dump it into Excel and run a report manually on a monthly basis, which the SEC would probably not really approve of, right? Because you're not taking an actual daily average balance of the account.
What are some examples of technology that does all that?
So the common names out there, Orion, Black Diamond, Tamarack, those are some of the bigger players that are billing and reporting systems. They've kind of evolved into offering more services. They're also including a rebalancing tool, which is important if an advisor wants to be multi-custodial versus just holding accounts at a Schwab or a Fidelity. So that kind of all plays into it.
What does that type of technology cost?
I think for a firm that is
$1 million or whatever.
Let's say a team that's $300-400 million, whatever their production is. It's based off the assets and the number of accounts that are associated with the system. So if you have a lot of accounts, you could be on the higher end of a number. If you have less accounts, you could be on the lower end of the number. But typically, if you're a $400 million team with 600 accounts, you're probably looking at anywhere from $50,000 to $80,000 for one of these systems, annually, recurring cost. And sometimes that includes the rebalancing aspect of the tool. Sometimes it doesn't. But
then don't forget, you have to have somebody that actually knows how to use the system on your team and make sure the information's correct and then executes on it.
I used to explain it that a Black Diamond and Orion are kind of viewed as the Mercedes and the BMW of the industry, right? They're sort of the best, right? Or viewed to be as the best. But sometimes your client says, hey man, I gave you $1 million. All I want to know is where are we at?
Yeah.
I really don't
balance, ending balance.
I don't really care if model, your growth model is outpacing the S&P by 3%. Allegedly, or whatever the number comes out to be.
Or your
right?
alpha is 1.3 or something like that. Don't care.
The average client is probably not looking at that, right? The average client is looking at it. I had $3 million at the beginning of the year. It's March. Where are we, right? And that's simple. So I think advisors buy some of these systems that they think they need, and in reality, the client doesn't care. Right. And there's systems like Advise-On or Panoramics that are more affordable, a lot more affordable sometimes, but you're still talking about, $25,000, $30,000 a year of a recurring cost. And yes, somebody has to, your office manager, your assistant has to be able to interpret the data. There's different ways you could present the data to your clients. Typically they'll have a portal. So who's going to educate the client on using the portal, or your staff on accessing the portal for these systems. The one big thing that is important, though, is some custodians will give you a billing and reporting system, and they might charge you a few basis points as a custody fee or however they're going to structure it. It's important to note that in those systems, or the custodians that offer that tool free, quote unquote, you technically or typically do not own the data. Okay. And that's a huge, huge issue, right? So if you create your own RIA and you're leaving a wirehouse or you're leaving an IBD and you're doing it for more freedom, more flexibility. I want to be able to help my clients. I want to be able to manage money however I see fit, et cetera. Owning the data of that billing and reporting system is crucial. You may join, or you may start using one custodian, and in 4 or 5 years, maybe there's an issue that drives you away from that custodian. And if you need to change custodians and you don't own that historical data, that's going to be a pretty big surprise the day you're looking to move and find out that, the past 5 years of my billing, account balances and everything, I don't own that. I can't move it. Man, I wish I would have known that day one, right? So I think some of the platforms that offer some of those billing and reporting systems, it might be appealing day one because I'm not outlaying $50,000 for a tool that, maybe I need, maybe I don't, but there's more to it than just, dollars and cents.
Yeah. So when you're going through these things as an advisor, thinking about starting your own RIA, it's really important. Obviously, this is maybe a plug to us, but working with someone like Vince that knows the things, you don't know what you don't know yet. So you have to work with somebody that knows this stuff. And candidly, this is not a shot at Schwab or anybody at Schwab or Fidelity, whatever, at the custodial level, right? But I hear all too often that the advisor at Schwab or the recruiter at Schwab says to the client, oh, we'll help you with that stuff. We'll advise you. They use the words, we'll advise you on that stuff. And the advisor interprets that like they're going to do it for them, right? No, they're just going to tell you what you need to go do. And then once they made the decision, it's no, we didn't say we were going to do it for you. We said we were just going to advise you and recommend the software you need to use, but you have to do it. And I think that, it's a big thing for you to move. The other thing is, 50,000, 80,000, 100,000. There's sometimes a little bit of sticker shock when you think about starting your own company, and you have to put things in relative terms, right? Yeah, you're getting 100% payout. So if you're $1 million producer, $1 million is passing through the front end, yep. And then you have to start taking so the net number, it's all about, I did a podcast called It's All About the Net. And so it's really all about how much you bring home. And so if you hear a number that's $50,000 or $80,000, which could be the biggest sort of, I'll say business expense, right?
Yeah.
Business expense you've ever paid in your life, because if you're coming from Morgan Stanley, that's just not going to happen. Don't necessarily get sticker shock. You have to look at the totality of what you're building, right? You're building an enterprise, a business, and an $80,000 bill is all relative. So just don't get sticker shock with that. But let me move on to the next question, because I sort of, in the interest of time, I want to get through a couple of these things, because the other comment people make is, oh, I want to be hybrid. I think I'm going to do the hybrid thing.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't really understand that. What's the difference between an RIA, and I'm just going to say it because this is the statement that I hear all the time, and a hybrid RIA?
I mean, on the surface, a hybrid RIA has an affiliation with a broker-dealer.
What is that? What do you mean by that?
So they'll have a relationship with a custodian to hold their fee-based accounts, and they'll have a relationship with a PKS, Cabot Lodge, someone along those lines, where they could do commission-based revenue. But let's take a step back. A lot of advisors that are transitioning are looking at it as, again, let's go to the wirehouse. I have accounts that are fee-based accounts, and some accounts I don't really have a lot of activity in. I might own Ford that was inherited. I'm never going to sell it, and you may be advising the client on that position, but compliance says no. Like, that can't be a fee-based account. It's, you haven't done anything in this account. Like, there hasn't been a trade. You own municipal bonds, and you're not trading those positions, so you can't charge a fee on this business, right? That changes when you're in the RIA world, whether you create your own RIA or you join a bigger RIA and become an IAR, right? It doesn't matter. There's different fee schedules that RIAs could implement that might be appropriate for that inactive equity or bond position account, where typically you would think that I need to have a BD affiliation for this segment of client, where in reality in the RIA world, you may not, right? You may be able to charge a flat annual fee of, let's say we're going to charge all these accounts that have legacy positions, we're going to charge you $500 a year or whatever it is, a flat annual fee. And I'm advising you on what to do in this position. There may become a time to liquidate this, right?
Sure, because a decision not to sell is still a decision.
I mean, if you told me, if you're my advisor and you think the market's going to crash and you moved all my money to cash, right? And I avoided a loss of 25%, aren't you worth like a 1% fee for that move? Like, I would think that's huge, right?
Right.
But in some of these other...
Or your own Uber or something like that, and your advisor tells you, don't sell it, right? Because it's going to keep going up. And since he said don't, or she said don't sell it, it's up 80%.
So a typical thinking, because advisors are busy managing their clients' wealth, right? When it comes to entertaining what's best for the next 5, 10, 15 years of my career, they're not supposed to know what's best for them, right? That's not what they do. That's what we do, right? And that's where a conversation with us is valuable. There's a lot of intricacies in making a move that an advisor shouldn't know. It's not their business to know. It's our business to know, and it's our job to basically guide you in the path of making a move. What's the best fit for me and my clients and my team going forward, right?
What's a friendly broker-dealer? What does that mean?
Friendly broker-dealer is basically a broker-dealer that understands that they're not the lion's share of your business, right? So PKS in the industry is one of the biggest, what's considered an RIA friendly broker-dealer. They know that they're going to have 5 to 10% of your overall business, and they're happy to have that. They clear through whoever they clear through, whether it's NFS or First Clearing or Pershing, etc. Sometimes they have all three too. They're a pretty big outfit, and they know that they're not going to be the lion's share of your business. They'll give you a payout on your commission revenue, but really that commission revenue that you should be thinking of, that you need a BD for, is really insurance business. If you're doing variable annuity business, VAs, you can't do on your own, right? So VAs, you absolutely need a broker-dealer, unless you're looking for a fee-based variable annuity, which are becoming more and more popular. But quite frankly, commissionable VAs are still a big...
But on the flip side, we talk to advisors and they say, well, I want to go RIA, because of blah, 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 whatever reasons, right? And I say, okay, great. What do you have in advisory business? They're like, well, I'm 90% advisory. Yeah. I said, okay, well, give me a breakdown of the assets. And then they proceed to tell me that, well, 30% of my assets are in American funds, and I'm collecting a trail on those. And then another 10% is, MFS funds, and I'm collecting a trail on those. And they don't understand that a trail on a mutual fund is not considered an advisory revenue. That's brokerage revenue, where you need a broker dealer to continue to collect those trails. Yeah. And so, from your experience, that's not really a question; it's more of a statement. So everybody understand that mutual fund trails, annuity trails,
it's commissionable revenue.
That's commissionable revenue, even though it's considered recurring revenue, right? Because it's recurring, like we said at the beginning, build that recurring revenue, right? Which a lot of advisors have. I know some friends of mine that are advisors, they have a huge mutual fund book of business where they're collecting recurring revenue in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's not fee-based. It's not considered fee-based according to sort of the industry. So from your experience, is there a line where an advisor draws that he's going to say, or she's going to say, I'm willing to give up a certain amount of this brokerage business to give up my 7 and go pure RIA? Like, is it 10% of their business, 20% of their business?
I think it comes down to more actual revenue, right? So if it's not, some of the friendly broker dealers are looking at 75,000 in GDC as a bottom. They may not even want to work with you at below that level, right? There's not enough skin in the game at that point. And realistically, I think, some of that A share business could be converted to a fee structure. You could swap it to an institutional share and charge the client a fee. Sometimes that's not easy. It could be a difficult transfer, but there's options there. I think if your revenue's 100, 150,000 in commissionable revenue, it starts to make more sense to have that BD affiliation, because it opens yourself up to increased scrutiny and regulation, right? Where there's additional regulation that the broker dealer needs to have to watch you, right? So you may have 150,000 in revenue from commission, but now the broker dealer might be responsible to watch everything you do on the RIA side of the business.
Even though the RIAs...
Even though it's held away, right? Because
why?
Because technically in a BD, now that's like doing business away, right?
Well, yeah, it's like outside business activity.
It's outside business activity, right? They have to watch that. You're registered with them, so now they need to know everything that you do.
So you're not basically front running would be a good example of what they're looking for.
Yeah, bottom line, they have to have oversight on your entire business. And some firms, some friendly broker dealers may say, well, 100,000 in GDC is not enough revenue for us. We're going to give you a 93% payout on your commission, but oh, by the way, we want 1 or 2% of your fee revenue that's held away from us to have the right to continue to do this commissionable business. Right. So some may say, well, we'll forego that. If you're doing 200,000 in GDC or a bigger number, we won't give you an override, or we won't take an override from your fee-based revenue that's held away from us.
So really you have to look at how much brokerage business are you doing? What are you going to get paid on it, right? And then what are you going to give up if the broker dealer that you're going to be working with is going to charge 1, 2, 3, 4, some of them charge like 5% on your advisory business. So what's the math, right? Do the math.
Yeah, again,
on those numbers.
It's not it's not really an asset level. It's a dollars and cents level. When's it going to make sense? Do I really need to continue to do business this way to collect an additional 100,000 in revenue, but it's going to detract, and I might have more compliance that I'm trying to get away from to begin with, right? So that's the whole thing. So unless it's really significant and there's no other way that you could run that business, it might make sense to not have a friendly broker dealer.
So you really need to have, if you're thinking about doing something like this, you really need to have a strategic plan. Sort of, what is your long-term plan? And maybe at the beginning, you're going to have to say, I'm going to give up that 80,000 a year in revenue because I'm going to save it on the other side by not having to pay whatever it is, right? We're not having to pay a firm that we're working with an oversight fee on that business. So, those are the business decisions that you have to make as you're becoming a business owner. And it's hard to talk to people that are outside the industry about your decisions because they don't understand what's happening, right? So working with someone like Vince, in this case, who's been around, can help you work through some of these hurdles, issues, speed bumps, emotional roller coaster that is starting a company, and just putting things into perspective really more than anything else.
Bottom line is that we're aware of options that you have. For example, on this topic, you could become rep of record on basically any account, right? That's a commissionable account. The question is, can you get compensated on that, right? So you may want to have a portion of your book that, okay, it's got to be commission. I'll become rep of record on that account, but I'm not going to get compensated, right? So that kind of protects it because that family or that account is part of a bigger relationship, and you don't want someone else calling on your client to service a $50,000 variable annuity. So maybe I become rep of record on it, forego payment on it, and eventually there'll be a life change and it'll come back into my world, right? So that's one example. Other examples are, if you're only going to do life insurance and term and things like that, you may not need a BD affiliation. You could have you could create your own insurance agency and get directly appointed with just about anybody directly to sell life insurance, right? So there's a lot of things. These are kind of like small details of, again, it's not the advisor's job to know everything about making a move, right? They're managing the client's expectations, their client's wealth, but it's important for the advisor to consider having a conversation with us because what you don't know could really hurt you.
Right. And you've been doing this for about a minute, right? If that, right? A cup of coffee, as they say. Yeah. And so your knowledge, and look, most advisors that we talk to are really smart individuals, right? But if you haven't been in this space like Vince has for north of 15 years, specifically in the RIA world, right? You just don't know. It's just not a shot at them. You just don't know what you don't know. Versus Vince has been doing it a lot longer, which is why we were so excited to have him join the firm, because it's where the puck is going in the industry. So anyway, why don't we stop there? I think we got our next one. Really, we're covering all these basics, right?
Yeah.
I think the next podcast that you guys should listen to is going to be really all about is an RIA structure the right structure for you? We're going to cover that on the next show because that's a whole nother topic, and there's some fundamental things going on there and costs. We touched on a little bit of here, but is it right for you? So stay tuned for our next episode. We're really excited about it. Again, we hope this was informative. If you are talking to someone that is saying to you, hey, I think I'm going to go RIA, I'm trying to learn about it, make sure you send in this podcast because we hope it helps. If you have any questions and you want to reach Vince, what's your number so they can reach out to you?
Yeah, 201-723-5934. Obviously, we'll post it up here. You go to our website as well. We're listed there.
What's your email address?
Yeah, Vince Leto at eliteconsultingpartners.com. Conversation doesn't cost you anything. And I think away from that, part of what we'll get into the next series is we don't represent one particular company. And that is huge. Right, so we're going to give you an aspect or kind of a lay of the land that is really kind of just an independent point of view.
Totally agnostic.
Of what's available to you. So that's a pretty powerful resource for you as you're considering your move. So
awesome. So we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Advisor Talk with Frank LaRosa. If you're looking for more advice or solutions on any topics in the financial services industry, or you just want to subscribe to our podcast, head on over to eliteconsultingpartners.com/podcasts.